This is Dead Serious, a show about short horror stories worthy of discussion. I'm Dead Palette, and I just found out where babies come from. Pregnant women. Apparently it's pregnant women. Today we're going to be taking a look at Fleming Unit 129, Father's Fantasy. Let's get right into it and analyze this bitch. After the padlock hit the ground, I squeezed my fingers under the metal door to allow myself access into the storage unit. That is a very autistic way to explain how you're getting in there detail by detail, but okay. Maybe this is who the character is. An email was sent out to me 5 days prior, on the 8th of October. The customers were allowed to retrieve their items from the 10th to the 14th, lest they should be sold at an auction. I did not have much care for anything still there, but I went to retrieve them, if simply to occupy my father. Not sure what they mean by occupy their father. Keep their father occupied, or is their father coming with them? Not sure. But this first paragraph, in upon itself, if it was judged independently without the context of the other stories, I'm not sure what important information is to be gleaned there. Now, obviously, if you're taking the story in upon itself, that stuff is important, but the other stories also will be mentioning that stuff. So that's something to keep in mind. Not a whole lot of new information in that first paragraph, and that's really where you want to come out and get people's attention. But maybe this is a little bit of an insight into the character's voice that we're going to see. So let's press on and see what happens. Entering the unit bode an odd feeling that the gray and currently cluttered area would simply be locked off forever. I had a wagon with me to allow easier transport to my father's truck outside. The phrasing is a little odd there, but I get what they're saying, and I guess I suppose a wagon would be helpful. It's not that long of a distance, but maybe it would be helpful. I started with the VHS tapes first. They were easier on me as they bore no physical trauma, unlike the later items. A lot of them were not labeled, mostly because the pencil that marked them was faded away to time. The ones that were said things like Wedding Day and Remodeling 91. Though I never met her, I always knew it was my mother's handwriting. I began to ignore the titles of some when I saw Pam's funeral. This is probably them trying to take their father there to keep them busy, and our narrator has lost their mother before they knew her, and the wedding day and the remodeling and stuff, and the idea that this is your mother's handwriting, even though you never knew your mother, that is a somewhat haunting idea. But I think the paragraph is clunkily written. There are some weird sentences that trail off. Not all of them are labeled, mostly because the pencil faded away to time. That makes sense. The ones that were said things like Wedding Day and Remodeling 91. Okay, I'm an idiot. Never mind. That makes sense. Next were the letters. My grandparents absolutely refused to buy a phone, and as a result, stuck to classic letters to be mailed around our family. I stored them here like the tapes because I had a knack for old things, film cameras and the like. I never read any of the letters out of fear of my father discovering. Of course, in those times, I wasn't his 8-year-old daughter. After the tapes were covered with brittle and yellowed paper, I moved on to the next items, the models. I'm honestly perplexed about some of the things that are happening here. Okay, so we're getting an idea of who our character is. Never knew their mother, but then there's this whole thing of course, in those times, I wasn't his 8-year-old daughter. Of course? I don't know what you mean. I'm guessing that means that you were adopted, but I don't know why I would know that, but not know what the storage units are. You know, like it's kind of weird what information we're being given and what information we're not. Maybe I'm crazy, but anyway. The first few were museum materials, beautiful paints that danced for your eyes despite being frozen on the plastic canvas. Details that would rival the cellular buildup of a leaf under a microscope. My father loved to build them. Aircrafts were his favorite. Wooden biplanes covered with cherry paper, dotted with British insignia, sat next to each other on an invisible runway. A storm-collared Focke-Wulf sat inches away, facing against an American Mustang that had lost its wing. At the end of the line, the shining F-22 sat ready to serve its country. They all looked so real, as if, at any moment, they could take flight and perform air shows around my head. The days that my father knew who I was, when he would do exactly that. I was never allowed to touch them otherwise. Okay, so, important things here. It seems as though perhaps the father is developing some sort of dementia, or, I'm reading ahead, it says schizophrenia. So our father is schizophrenic, and had a love for model planes. I think that's a nice character detail. That's a very small town thing, taking an interest in model planes. And along with all of that, the language of this fanciful, like them dancing around your head, is very nice. This here, the story was losing me at the beginning, but it's starting to pull me in again. Then the paintings came. My father had been an expert at painting. He actually used to work as a teacher on it. Notice, however, that I say had. My father developed schizophrenia when he was 26. I know this only because it is the reason he was placed on medical leave. Its gradual and slow spread showed in his work. While teaching a lesson, he would redraw the same line hundreds of times as if stuck in a loop, oblivious to everything else going on around him. It was frightening when he would be still. His whole body seemed to freeze in time. His very breathing seemed to slow. His eyes would be fixated on spaces unseen to anyone else. These episodes could last for a couple minutes to several hours. Okay, so schizophrenia is a very disturbing real-world thing to have to witness, certainly have, but even witnessing it, having a father, needing to care for that father, that is a very real-world horror to deal with, and it's described here quite eloquently. What scared me was that he had no idea what was happening to him. What scared me the most was that when he stopped recognizing me. Again, terrifying thing to have happen. I don't know how I would deal with that. If I ever had to deal with, my father not recognizing me, that is a pretty hard thing to place on a young person. I don't know what our age is, but definitely young in relative terms in some way. With each painting deteriorating further and further, another dagger of my reminder was stabbed into my heart, forcing me back to the reality of my current life. After the rest were placed in the rusty metal carriage, I grabbed the handle and proceeded back outside, nodding at one of the passing security guards. After I was done loading everything into the truck, I had gone straight home. I would return later to retrieve everything else. Okay, so the father wasn't there this whole time. I'm not sure what they mean by... The beginning of this was very bizarre to me, which you don't get that very often, that the beginning is the most poorly edited part, because these paragraphs are really starting to pull me in. I think the issue is that our author, not our narrator, our author, didn't necessarily know what information to include and not include, and so it's a rough start, but once they actually get going, there's a clear plot here that is really drawing me in. I parked in the cramped garage only because that week had been on the chilly side, and unloaded the items from the wagon into a corner, taking a colorful Spitfire with me. Walking inside to let him know I was home was the first hard thing to do. Turning into the living room and taking 4 steps would bring his monotone voice to punch holes into my ears. He was having a conversation with my Uncle Glenn. I tried to ignore the fact that my uncle was killed several years ago in Qatar. Oof. Okay. So, again, the father is having, these problems, and our narrator is presumably a caretaker of her father. earlier on they were talking about the pain of lifting up all of these items, and it was a little weird because we didn't know what it meant exactly, and maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. Let me know in the comments whether you wanted that information earlier or not, but now we get the gravity of the situation. My father never paid any mind to my existence when I was first home. His ruptured mind would always be focusing on something else. That day was different. He stopped talking altogether when he noticed the small plane I held delicately in my hands. Looking into his eyes made my heart ache. They were clear gray to everyone, but to me they were clouded. They bore no light of remembrance, no happiness. His mouth opened and closed like a deaf person speaking. This language being used is on the border between being flowery and being realistic, but I think it's still something that you could see someone who is organizing their thoughts say, and it makes sense. So I really do appreciate the phrasing here, pushing realism to its limits, but staying within those bounds. They were clear gray to everyone, but to me they were clouded. They bore no light of remembrance, no happiness. His mouth moved, open and closed like a deaf person speaking. That's all really nice and vivid imagery. It evokes a strong image, I think. Tom, I told you not to touch my models. They're for Mary only, he had said. I didn't move, didn't speak. His mind would do that for him. I don't care. Put it back now. It appeared Tom had said the wrong thing. I gently placed it on the floor. When I stood back up, his fist came smashing into my face. Woof! I learned later that it would be the cause behind the crack in my skull. And also my permanent blind eye. Above me, I heard my father tell Tom not to touch his models and to put them back. He said he didn't care and to put them back. His fist briefly obscured my vision of the ceiling. He repeated this process 36 times. When he told Tom not to touch his models again, he stopped talking. He turned around and walked away. I wasted no time in hurrying to my room. For the fourth time in my life, I slept with my door locked. So in this scenario, our schizophrenic father is beating our narrator and, is unaware of what's going on. I think that this is, the narrator's father remembering something from childhood, perhaps a sibling. It's a little unclear, and, that doesn't take away from the fact that this is obviously, written in some really plain language of like, it's very matter of fact, but it does feel kind of how you would say something if you were being interviewed by Barbara Walters, if that makes any sense. I know that that's a weird stretch, but that's where my mind goes. When I woke up on the 14th, I came back downstairs to find the plane laying in the same spot it had sat in. My father was nowhere to be found. I deviated from my normal course to go look for him, but after realizing what I was doing, quickly stopped and went outside. The truck wasn't there, just my car. I remember thinking that he had gone to the store. It never crossed my mind that my father doesn't know he owns a truck. That's what I believe, at least. I returned to the facility and closed the same rut I did the day before. Dragged the wagon down, show my credentials to the office, and walked down to the back. Thrusting the garage door open a second time, I went back to work. Started with the right side where some of my own items lay. Simple things like journals and old stuffed animals I used to play with that simply had no use taking up space at home. So our schizophrenic, audio-visual hallucinating father took pickup truck somewhere and we don't know where. Our narrator, was fearing for their safety and they locked their door, slept with their door closed. Also, should note that the details, the Fleming effect here, the details being given are about something our narrator knows about and has fond memories of. Probably not now, but the model planes. We get all these details, and their father is sort of this model plane otaku of sorts, and that is the cause for the violence. And I do wonder how impaired the father is if they're not going to go looking for the father when they drive off. These are just thoughts. They brought me down further than I already was. With each item, a strain of memory would surface itself, watching him carve my initials into the backside of a silver watch with a knife pointed at me a second later. A Barbie house I used to play with. It looked like a box with a handle on top and 2 brass clips on the side. Blue, faded paint formed the walls, while darkened greens created plants. Barbie's dream house was written on the top. The only dream it brought back to me was when my father had thrown it at a wall, requiring me to fix it the next day. Okay, so these are, a bunch of traumatic memories that they're going through. The line about Barbie's dream house was written on the top. The only dream that brought me back was, this terrible memory. That's a really good line. When I had seen the next item, I simply stopped. It was a cassette tape lying next to an ancient Walkman. Nobody else can get into this vault except me and my father. Remembering that he had gone somewhere, I calmed down and inserted the tape in. Curiosity beamed in my mind as to why he would come here and leave music. I was surprised that he even remembered this place. It wasn't music. Mari, he said my name to me, not to a figment. I made a horrible mistake that day. I listened to him speak. Then I cried. A hole exists in my chest, where I presume emotions come from. It became a crater that day. I didn't call anyone immediately. I just sat there on the cold floor for a while. I know it was for hours, as I had arrived at 11:04 a.m. and left at 1:56 p.m. I didn't take anything with me. Everything I had in the wagon I had slowly put on the floor. A silver watch, a Barbie house, a quaint tower tipped with a crimson flame made of stone. A quaint tower tipped with a crimson flame made of stone. I didn't know why I took the time to. I never exited the wagon. I merely exited what little remained of my life, brought down the metal barrier, and sealed off those memories forever. And that's the end of our story. So there's a lot of filming effect here where we're, giving specific times and that kind of thing. And what it makes me think is not so much that they're trying to give me these details, but it makes me think that there is some sort of this person has a weird perception. What some might, call it autism. It might be some sort of disorder where they're telling us details that aren't necessarily important to the story. And I think that, I'm not sure if that's our author intending that, our character to be like that and have this uptight way of remembering numbers and things of that nature, or if they are trying to include details and failing to find ways to do it. I'm not sure which of those things it is. Let me know what you think it is in the comments, and whether you like that stuff, think it should stay, think it should go. The ending, I think, is quite interesting. It pulls me in. I like the idea that they are hearing their father talk to them for the first time in a long time, and we don't know what it is that is said. But what we can assume, and there's this phrasing, nobody can get into this vault except me. I think that's, 2 layers. We don't know, the father can get into the storage unit, and along with that, the only person who can listen to the audio recording is the daughter. And we don't know what was on the tape, but I'm going to go out on a limb and assume the father knows that the father had become a burden, to some degree, because of the schizophrenia, and probably went off to sail off into the sunset to not be a burden anymore. And this, of course, isn't what the daughter wanted. And, they regret not going after the father and trying to find them. And this has left a crater, as they put it, where their emotions used to come from, and they feel empty because of it. This story, I think, is very compelling. I'm really interested in it, but it has all of these weird, clunky little bits about it that really do need to be cleaned up. I do have some moments here where it's ambiguous, what's going on or what the author intended. And I'm sure that, if we get in touch with the author, we can clear up some of those issues. But this story really did have a nice plot line. I did like the voice in it of our narrator. And this scene in upon itself, that is horrifying, someone being punched. I do wonder whether they went blind initially or over time in that eye that they were punched in repeatedly. But, minor nitpicks. Certainly did really enjoy this one, and a very worthy inclusion in the Fleming storage units. Now, if you enjoyed that, consider checking out the Fear Fiction podcast, where three assholes, talking basement goose slime beast, inebriated interstellar traveler Abysme, and myself read all stories horror and internet related, paragraph by paragraph, and bullshit while we do it. From adolescent revenge fantasies to subtle postmodern narratives about real life events and everything in between. We read them and we critique them. Link to that is down in the description. Thank you so much for your time, and now on to our sponsor at this non-moment in time, which is unpasteurized milk. Unpasteurized milk. Ooh, baby, I like it raw.